Welcome to the Core Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rawls. This podcast is aimed at helping entrepreneurs in the outdoor industry. Each episode is a conversation with an entrepreneur willing to share what they've learned so that we can benefit from their experiences. This podcast is brought to you by CORE, the Kootenay Outdoor Recreation Enterprise. CORE is a nonprofit organization based in the Kootenay region of interior British Columbia. CORE's mission is to support the growing network of gear and apparel makers and entrepreneurs within the Kootenays. My conversation today is with Raquel Vélez, the founder and CEO of Alpine Parrot. Alpine Parrot makes technical outdoor apparel for sizes 14 to 30, which, until now, has been a category that the outdoor industry has all but ignored. Raquel has a background in engineering, and she used her experience working with Bay Area tech companies to springboard her journey into entrepreneurship. In our conversation, Raquel breaks down how apparel patterns are made and why the previous method for creating plus-sized apparel didn't work and it left the customers frustrated. She tells the story of launching Alpine Parrot by learning how to sew, creating all of her own prototypes, and then successfully funding the launch through a Kickstarter campaign. We talk about building a community of customers and how her retail partners are instrumental in providing the best experience to her customers. We also talk about the important role that mentors, peers, and her time in accelerator programs have played in keeping her going through turbulent times. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Raquel Vélez. So my first question for you is, what is your best memory of being outside?
Yeah. Okay. So I have two, which I know is weird, but it's important. So I did not grow up in the outdoors. The idea of my family's from Puerto Rico and I grew up in New Jersey, but the idea of voluntarily sleeping on the ground outside in the cold was not my parents' definition of success. So I did not do a lot of outside things as a kid. However, my bedroom growing up had this window that went out onto a partial roof. I'm sure there's an actual architectural term for it, but it doesn't matter. And I'm going to date myself, but I had a cordless phone, like you saw on Saved by the Bell in the 90s, right? I had a cordless phone and I would go out onto my little roof and I would sit outside in the sun and I would either talk on the phone or I'd read a book. I love reading. And I would have my neighbors would be walking down the street and they'd look up and they'd be like, "What are you doing on the roof?" And I'm like, "I'm just getting some sunshine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it." And I say that's the first thing that popped in my mind. Actually, it was the second thing that popped in my mind, which is why I'm like, okay, there's two things. Because the other one was literally this past weekend. I went camping with some friends, which for someone who literally doesn't sleep outside in the cold, I've gone complete 180. And I had this incredible magical weekend with my husband and our dogs in our adventure van and then two friends in their tents. And we had dinner by the fire and we went hiking and it was like the most perfect outdoor weekend that I've ever had. Yeah. It was like the epitome of what I could and would have wanted when I was a kid sitting on top of a roof, but I didn't know that was a thing that I could have. So I have two.
That's beautiful. I like it. I guess I have a lot of follow-up questions. How do you get from sitting on the roof? Like, where did the love for the outdoors come from then? Like, what was the initiating point in life to introduce you to, there is other things other than.
Yeah. Outside? So, okay. Another thing that I want to point out about family from Puerto Rico is that I think what a lot of people outside of North America or developed countries, et cetera, not that Puerto Rico is undeveloped, but what a lot of people don't seem to get is that when you live in a place that is well regarded as one of the most naturally beautiful places in the world, spending time outside is just something you do. It's like literally you walk out your front door and you're surrounded by this incredibly beautiful nature. And it wasn't until later that I learned this term nature walking, where you're not going for a hike. Like nobody, like maybe you'll have a bottle of water or something with you and a snack, but you're not thinking about what trail am I going to take? You're not thinking about what's the elevation or the length or anything like that. You're just going out into nature just because that's what you do. So I grew up with that. This idea of pre-planning and saying, okay, we have to do this and then we have to do that and these other things, like that's too much effort. That's way too much effort. It should be very easy. So growing up, I saw other people going on these camping trips with their families or with their friends. And I'm like, that seems like a lot of work and it seems like really expensive. And my family never did that. Why would you do that? Again, why would you sleep outside when your parents have worked super hard to get a roof over your head in the first place? So it wasn't until I met my husband, actually. So we were dating and he was like, hey, let's go for a hike. And I'm like, we're going for a walk. And he's like, no, we have to plan it. We have to do all this stuff. And I was like, that seems weird, but okay. And it was actually amazing because sometimes when you plan things, you get more of an experience than if you just go for a wander and then stop and then turn around and go home, right? Like you have more supplies, you can go further. And that initial kind of going out hiking turned into more adventures. And what really got me into the outdoors was when I went skiing for the first time, like really skiing, not like fake skiing where you go on like a school ski trip, like actually went skiing, took a lesson and just completely and totally fell in love with this idea of flying down a mountain. And that was the real turning point for me where I was like, oh, I want to do this again and I want to do it all the time. And so I often credit skiing as my gateway sport to the outdoors because that led to climbing and hiking and eventually camping and backpacking and kayaking and surfing. And now I do all the outdoor things except for mountain biking. I'm not into it. It's not my thing, and that's okay.
It's dangerous and expensive.
So are all the other things.
True. I want to talk about, obviously, we want to talk about Alpine Parrot and how you got there. But I think the stories that lead up to how we got to where we are now as entrepreneurs are super important and formative. The previous things you've done before Alpine Parrot play a role in where you are now and how you think about the world and how you see the world. So talk a little bit about what you were doing before you became an entrepreneur and how the role that plays in being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, definitely. So I should start by saying that my parents are entrepreneurs. So I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. And I think that has, depending on your perspective, it's either made me very well prepared to be an entrepreneur or very ill prepared to be a regular contributing member of society. So
are they mutually exclusive?
No, not necessarily. But again, like it depends on your perspective, right? Like glass half empty, half full sort of situation. And so I did the whole school thing, got my degree in mechanical engineering. I wanted to be a roboticist. Actually, growing up, I wanted to be a filmmaker, but then I discovered robots. And then I was like, oh no, I want to be a roboticist. This is way cooler. And then from robotics, I found more of a niche in software engineering. So I did that for a while. And software engineering actually brought me to San Francisco. And I became an engineering manager working for kind of companies you've heard of. And I love being an engineer because if there's one consistency, it's that I'm an engineer. But I've jumped around in different types of engineering. I actually started a couple of companies throughout that process. I started a robotics education company that didn't quite go the way I wanted it to. I started like a social networking type of company, but that ran out of money. And so I always knew that I wanted to build something on my own, but I didn't know what it was yet. And so I just kept going on a path. I don't know about the path, but a path. And at my last job in tech, I was like, okay, I'm going to be here for 2 years and then I'm going to go start my own thing. And I don't know what it is yet, but I know that's happening next. And I was very lucky because when I started at that company, it hadn't gotten public yet. But by the time I left, it had. And so I won the tech lottery, basically. And that was how I managed to have enough money to start a company, and specifically an apparel company, because working in software, I call it modern day alchemy because you build gold out of nothing. But I missed working with my hands, missed it a lot. And so I hated buying jeans because they never fit. And a lot of people who wear jeans will probably acknowledge this travesty of experience. And I was like, I have a degree in mechanical engineering. How hard could it be to make my own pants? Surely I could figure this out. And that turned into a side project of sewing, learning how to sew, learning how to make my own patterns, and then eventually deciding to merge this idea of I need to go do something on my own. And hey, I've figured out how to make clothes fit. This is interesting. Oh, and I love going outside. I like to think of myself as really broad in terms of my understanding of things, but not that deep. I'm not an expert in anything.
Yeah. You're perpetually curious, it sounds like.
Yes, definitely. I'm always asking questions and I'm always exploring. That's fun.
That's great. Curiosity is the best way to be led, I think.
I think so.
So let's talk about Alpine Parrot. We've been leading up to the things in your life that kind of created this Venn diagram of what you're interested in, and you decided to take the plunge. You won the tech lottery, which congratulations, very lucky to do that.
Thanks.
You walked away with a little bit of runway to start your own thing. So what was impetus behind creating Alpine Parrot, and what was your thinking behind bringing this to market? And I've introed it already in the intro, but maybe let's hear it from your words. What is Alpine Parrot and what does it do?
Yeah, totally. So Alpine Parrot is an outdoor apparel company that caters specifically to bigger bodies. As someone who lives in a bigger body, I got really frustrated with not being able to find any clothes that fit me to go outside safely and comfortably. And the reality is that for those of us who spend time outdoors, we know that having the right gear matters. Sure, you can go hiking in leggings and Tevas. You can. You totally can. But there is a point at which you are limited. You cannot go further because the leggings are limitations, the Tevas are limitations. Eventually, you do need proper hiking apparel. And for me, it was actually with skiing. I couldn't find snow pants. Like when I went to my first ski lesson, they were like, wear something warm and waterproof. And I was like, I have available to me sweatpants, hoodies, and a rain jacket and rain pants. So I'm just going to layer. And maybe I'll hate this sport, so I don't want to invest any new money, so it's fine. But when I fell in love with it, I was like, oh shoot, now I have to actually find clothes. And I couldn't. And doing some research, it shows that 68% of American women wear sizes 14 and up, and yet less than 20% of outdoor apparel is made in plus sizes. So there's a huge mismatch between who's out there and who the clothes are made for. And I think that's really unfair. And it's frankly a physical barrier to entry. It's basically saying you don't belong here because we don't want to give you anything so that you can do this safely and comfortably. So in the same way that, yes, you can start with leggings and Tevas on a hike, you eventually get limited. If you can't find anything except leggings and Tevas to go hiking, you are limited. There's a stopping point. You cannot go further. Hilariously, at the same time that I was like, I want to go figure out how to make jeans, I was learning how to make patterns. I went to a pattern making school. And in that school, there was a class on designing your own products and making a company. And I created this fake brand and I had to design an 8-piece line. And I decided to make a women's plus size ski wear line. And I presented to the class. I made up a company and all this stuff. And at the end, my teacher pulled me aside and she was like, Raquel, you have to do this. This is really important. Like, you are your customer. You understand the needs of this person, and there's no one else doing this. No one else. And I was like, that's silly. I work in tech and I'm miserable, but at least I make a lot of money. And, and a few months after that conversation with my teacher, I was actually in New Zealand and I was so burned out. And I was like, I just want to spend time outside. I don't want to think about tech anymore. I just want to have fun playing outside. And you know what? Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could start an apparel company. I don't know. And I turned to my husband. I was like, can I give all this up and make pants? And he was like, yeah, okay, sure. I don't think he knew what he signed up for. I also made the huge mistake of assuming that if you want to spend more time outside, the first thing you should do is start an outdoor company. And anybody who has done that will tell you straight up, you do not get to spend as much time outside as you want to. It is not quite, that's not how capitalism works. There were some rude awakenings in store for me, but that was the conversation with my teacher was in January of 2019. My trip to New Zealand was in spring of 2019. And then by summer of 2019, I launched Alpine Parrot LLC. I got the signed paperwork from our Secretary of State. And that was pretty exciting. But then I stayed at my tech job for another 8 months or so, left in February 2020. And then 6 weeks later, the entire world shut down. So it's been an adventure ever since.
The original product was ski wear, outerwear.
Yeah.
But you decided not to go to outerwear. You started with let's call it
hiking.
Technical hiking pants.
Yes. Yeah, so exactly.
Why did you move from ski to hiking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really comes down to basic economics. So in pattern making, you learn that if you have a base pattern, you can build everything else off of that. So if I have a base pattern for pants, I can build any type of pant. If I have a base pattern for a shirt, I can build any type of shirt, and then ditto jackets, etc. So I was like, okay, the base pattern required for a pair of ski pants is going to be the exact same as the base pattern for a pair of hiking pants. However, ski pants are really expensive to make, and they're really expensive for people to buy. And the number of people who do winter sports is so much smaller than the number of people who do summer sports. Clothes are also a lot cheaper to make, cheaper to sell. And so it made more sense. Like, why would I spend more money for a smaller audience when I could spend less money for a bigger audience and try to really build a name that way? And then eventually the goal is to go over to ski. And once we have that name recognition, that brand recognition, and then we can have the smaller numbers. Because at the end of the day, when you're working with factories, you have this thing called the minimum order quantity, and also known as MOQs. And if you're trying to work with snow stuff, the minimum order quantity is going to be exactly the same, regardless of what you're making. So if the minimum order quantity is 1,500 pieces, I'd rather have 1,500 pieces that I think are going to have a better chance of selling through than something that's more expensive and might not sell through. Right? It requires more capital upfront. So it's really just economics. I was the
total addressable market.
It seems exactly.
Nice.
Yes.
You did some early engineering on the thinking through it, which is good. That's a good way to approach starting a business is what's the actual market here that I could sell to? So
right.
That makes sense. And learning about Alpine Parrot and reading and your blog, which is really great. I really appreciate you're really using that kind of founder-led business and informing your customers and creating a rallying cry, so to speak, mission-led in that way. So I guess with that, what was your vision starting out for Alpine Parrot and creating that mission for your customers? And what was the rallying cry that you created to bring on board those early customers?
So coming from tech, I have these very strong feelings about venture capitalism. It's jokingly called vulture capitalism for a reason. And it can be a lot. It can be very exhausting to constantly have to meet someone else's needs, financial needs, more than the needs of your customers. And so I very early on knew that I wanted to put Alpine Parrot on the path towards being a B Corp. And we started that by eventually becoming a public benefit corporation, which we can talk about if we want to. But all that to say, in order to be a PBC or B Corp, you do need to have a mission, and it needs to be driven by your customers and things like that. And what's interesting is that there's a very vocal group of people who are in bigger bodies and want to spend time outside. And so all I needed to do was say, hey, this company is for us, not for you, not for me, but for us. And that's what we did. I was just like, this is a company for us. I am one of us, and we are going to have a company that one of the things that separates Alpine Parrot from other brands is that we start at size 14 and go up from there. And there's a lot of folks who are, wait, but what about everybody else? Like, why would you start at size 14? That's not particularly inclusive. And I will very kindly but bluntly say, you're right. We're not inclusive. We're not an inclusive brand. We're actually exclusively for bigger bodies. And that's only because every other brand out there already focuses on the 0 to 12 market. And you have literally hundreds of options, and people in bigger bodies have less than 10. So it's more of an equity movement, and as opposed to equality. I'm sure you've seen that image of equality versus equity. It's like the kids standing at the fence trying to watch the baseball game. And equality is everybody gets one box, regardless of how tall you are. Okay, maybe the one box lets one more kid look over the fence, but the shortest kid still can't see. Equity is saying, okay, if everybody wants to see the game, the shortest kid needs the most boxes to stand on, whereas the tall kid doesn't necessarily need any. And now everybody can see the game and participate equally. That's just a fun way of being like, yeah, we are very much mission driven. We want to make sure that everybody has equal access to the outdoors. And that means that we need to focus more on the people who don't have any access in the first place. And we're focusing pretty much on bigger bodies only.
You gave some pretty astonishing stats earlier in our conversation. See if I can recall it best. 68% or 60 something percent of women are 14 plus sizing, and only 20 something percent of outdoor apparel is made in those sizes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
I know that there's been some bigger brands that are making the move that way. Like I know Outdoor Research has a really great program now that they've brought out.
Definitely.
For plus sizing and very specific patterns. What is keeping them? I don't understand. There's a market there and there's customer base there. In your perspective, what's keeping the brands from going that direction?
Absolutely. Okay. So there's a few different things. The first one is an unfortunate reality of just our culture. Culturally, we have managed to convince ourselves that people in bigger bodies don't go outside, which is totally false. If you go to any national park, you will see there are people in lots of different size bodies who are enjoying the outdoors, period, full stop. But the marketing is very much focused on these like 20-something-year-olds who are in the peak prime condition of their lives, and they're doing these extreme sports, right? And so it's, hey, wait a minute, not everybody, that's 2% of the population, maybe. So it's a very interesting, okay, you're like, that's not reality, but it's the reality that has been served to us. So it's really easy to assume that people in bigger bodies don't go outside. So that's number one. They just don't understand the market as it currently exists. But there's actually a bigger financial component to it, which is, we're going to take a step back and we're going to talk about how does apparel get made? A very easy primer. Okay. When a brand designer decides, okay, I'm going to make a piece of clothing, and they sketch it out and they're like, okay, cool. This is what it's going to look like. Then they bring in a real human who is called a fit model. And that fit model is usually their size medium. And that person fits the image of the designer of the epitome of the brand customer. Okay. Now, medium traditionally is a woman's size 6 or 8. And so they literally will find a woman size 6 or 8. And this is obviously for women's clothing, but true is still for men's clothes as well. They'll bring them in and they'll take all the measurements. Like, it's not just the 1 or 2 measurements that you're used to having to see on a size chart. It's 35 measurements, and they'll make a pattern to fit that person perfectly. And then they'll take that pattern and they'll do this process that's called grading, which is totally computerized now, but old school, the way that you do it is you take your pattern piece and you would put a grid on the pattern and you'd cut along the lines of that grid. Think of graph paper, and you're cutting along those lines. And you spread the pieces out to make bigger sizes, and you overlap the pieces to make smaller sizes. And the amount of that spreading out or overlapping, that's called your grade rule. And that's how you decide, okay, a size 6, a size 4, a size 2, a size 8, a size 10, a size 12. You're just spreading those pieces out a little bit more, and you're connecting the edges together to make your new pattern pieces. Now, if you're starting with a size 6 and you're going to a size 8, the change is not that big. It's like a fraction of an inch or a centimeter, depending on who's listening. But when you go from a size 6 to a size 16, that could be an inch. And if you've ever zoomed in, like on old school photocopy machines, and you zoom in so far that you end up having these dots, and the dots just start to spread out even more and more, it becomes really distorted. And this is what there was actually a movement to have more plus sizes, I'd say about a decade ago. And it totally flopped because all the brands were like, it's fine. We'll just continue to grade up to size 18 and it'll be no big deal. We'll just use the same grade rules we've always used. Except when you're going between a size 6 to a size 8, it's proportionally not too different. But when you go up to a size 16, the proportions get totally weird. I would go and buy clothes. So I'm like a size 16 or 18, which is the average American woman size, by the way. And I'd put it on and the collar would be super wide, or the sleeves would be really long. The mannequin would be wearing skinny jeans. And when I put them on, they were wide leg. And it was really confusing. And it's because they're making these assumptions that your girth and your length are going to be going at the same rate, which that's just not how bodies work. So all that to say is that what I've found is that at a certain point, you have to start over. You can't just use the same fit model. You need more fit models in order to bridge the gap in between. The other thing that I've learned is that people come in different shapes in addition to different sizes. And unfortunately, a lot of women's outdoor clothing is actually just a shrunken and pinket of men's clothing. And men are shaped very differently than women. And so that also causes all sorts of distortion. And so it takes a lot of work to make more patterns, to add more sizes. Bigger sizes inherently require more fabric. And then they put it out into stores and it didn't fit right, so no one bought it. Now, instead of taking a moment and internalizing and saying, oh, we must have done something wrong with our fit, they said, oh, no one's buying it. The market's not actually there. So we won't serve it anymore because it's not there. No one cares. And it's okay. Yes, the data, you can interpret data in different ways, but the interpretation that they chose does not reflect the reality. There are still lots of people who want it. It just didn't fit. Why would you buy ill-fitting clothing, especially for the outdoors, where when clothes don't fit properly, that's dangerous, right? If you have a PFD that doesn't fit, you should not go kayaking that day. You should not go whitewater rafting because it won't serve you properly. So very long-winded response, but there's the social and the financial. People don't want to spend money if they're not going to get the return on their investment. So I love what outdoor research has been doing, though, because they have actually stepped back and gone back to first principles and saying, okay, we're going to need new fit models. We're going to need to rethink through all of this stuff and let's make it happen.
And to success, it's working from what I understand from them. It's working for them. And they actually have ambassadors for that program. And they're actually getting athletes on board that serve that community, which is, I think you have to take it from that big perspective. It's not just putting product out there. We need to change what the aspirational part of the brand looks like as well.
Absolutely. And they're not serving everyone, but nor does any single brand serve everyone. You have to have multiple brands, which is why, interestingly, in the plus size community, there are lots of brands that are starting to come in, or established brands that are starting to come into this space. And we're all really supportive of each other. Like, we all know each other and we're all just, oh my God, congratulations, you did it. This is amazing. Go you. because we all serve a slightly different niche of the same larger customer base.
Sure. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset. If you take a slice of the pie, the economic pie, that the pie doesn't get smaller, it just gets
No.
bigger.
Yes, exactly.
We're just
Especially when you're working with a totally underserved population that wants to spend their money, right? Like they've never spent their money before because they couldn't. Now they want to spend their money. You're not going after, you're literally bringing more people into the market.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
Actually, you have a great blog post about pattern making and about the fit models, and I learned a lot from it. So thank you for covering that.
awesome.
It's really important to cover that. I think that's
Yeah.
bringing a fair bit of knowledge, whether you're into soft goods design or not. It's important to understand, how do our clothes get made? And that is one thing that as consumers, we are very ignorant of, is
Totally.
how do we actually make this stuff and how does it work? And the more we can learn about that, I think it's good to bring your consumers along for the ride, but it's also just good for us to know how things work.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So you've got this idea. Here it is. I'm going to make this product. How did you decide which product you're going to come out with first? And then what was that product and how did it actually roll out into the market?
Yeah, definitely. As someone who is on the smaller end of the plus size spectrum, I actually have a lot of privilege. I have this, I'm a small fat. If you are familiar with the fat spectrum, I'm a small fat, or maybe like a baby fat. I'm at the top end of what we'll call mainstream sizing and at the bottom end of plus sizing, which some people will think, oh, that means you can buy from anyone. And actually what it means is I can't buy from anyone because bell curves. Usually in the plus size, your fit model is probably in a size 20 or 22. And in your standard sizing or your mainstream sizing, it's a size 6 or an 8. So being a size 16, you're like right in the middle. So it's never right. But t-shirts wise and like tops wise, I'm usually like a large or extra large. So I can usually fit there. But pants are the worst. Pants are the absolute horrible worst. I had already been working on jeans and I was like, oh my God, great fitting jeans are just a life changer. I was like, I need hiking pants. Let's do pants. And so, yeah, that's where I started. And I will joke, boobs and butts are the hardest thing in apparel because everybody's got different shapes and getting that just right is daunting. It's a very daunting task. And so I decided to start with hiking pants because it's what I needed. And I knew that there were a lot of other people who were going to be like, yes, pants, finally, something that fits me properly. So that was where I started.
Like, so how do you go from working in tech to figuring out, yes, you went to apparel making school and learned that side of it, but that's really just the head knowledge, and so to speak. Now you got to figure out like how does the rubber meet the road and we actually produce pants.
Yeah.
So what did you do to go find factories and find fabrics and give yourself a street level knowledge of that?
Yeah. So this is actually what I did in the 6 to 8 months between when I founded the company and when I actually went full time as CEO. Was I spent that time really learning how to make pants on my own, right? Using fabrics that I have access to at sewing stores and things like that. And I sewed my own pants and I just prototyped over and over. I must have made probably 20 pairs of pants until I was like, I got it. This feels good. And I went to fabric shows. So there are industry fabric shows, which are very different from, I don't want to call them commercial fabric shows, but there's there are different types of fabric shows. In LA, there's a fabric show, which is really more about fashion. So it's your cottons and your linens, but it's like cotton poplin and cotton this and cotton that and all these. And I'm like, none of these are good. I would walk around and be like, look, I want heavy duty fabric made out of nylon that is, at the time I wanted waterproof and breathable and abrasion resistant and has stretch. And they would look at me like I had 4 eyes. They were like, I don't know what you're talking about. That is not what we do here. We are a fashion establishment. I was like, okay, I'm obviously not in fashion. But then there was another fabric show called what was it called? It was a technical fabric show and it was in Portland. And it was the Functional Fabric Fair. That's what it was called. It's alliterative. And I would walk in and I would say, here are my requirements. And they're like, here's a binder. And it was like this binder that was probably like, I don't know, 8 inches thick. And it had just stacks of fabrics. And I was like, oh my God. And they're like, what kind do you want? Do you want more nylon, more abrasion resistance? Do you want waterproofing? Do you want it like quick dry? What do you want? This and this. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much to learn. And I would just sit there and I would just touch every single fabric sample that they had until I was like, this, I want to try this. I want to try this. I want to try this. But you have to have a company first. Like you can't just walk in there as any random person. So I was very glad that I had started the company so that I could do that. And I ordered samples and then I took my patterns that I had been perfecting and I started making my own actually out of the materials that I wanted and tested those out. And I would go on test hikes and I would do all these things just to really test. And so went through all of that. Then the pandemic hit and I couldn't use anybody else as a fit model because I couldn't come within 6 feet of anybody. So I used myself as a fit model. And then I started working with the community and figured out a way to get people to test things on real bodies. I was sewing everything. I hired another person to help me sew stuff, but we were still in like the prototyping phase. Eventually I was like, okay, I'm not going to make all of these. This is just too much. I know you've chatted with Mallory Tariano from Ewer. She's incredible. She started her own factory. I was not about to do that. That is not a thing that I wanted to do. I actually went to an apparel making boot camp where I got to work in a factory and I got to learn what it's like to sit on the stitching line and how you cut fabric and all these other things. Like I learned all of that, which was great. Had that personal experience, but I also knew there was no way I could start my own factory. I thought about it. I did the numbers. It wasn't going to work out. I live in California in the Bay Area, and it is just too expensive to do that here. Finding a factory is really hard. I worked with a bunch of different people to I think one of the biggest misnomers is we're so used to being able to go online and find things on Google. And I needed an eye doctor, and you find Yelp and it'll tell you, here are 5 eye doctors in your area that have 5-star reviews. Great. You can't really do that with factories because most factories don't want you to call them. They don't want you to know who they are because they only want to work with people who know what they're doing. The worst thing is for an apparel entrepreneur who has never done this before to show up and be like, hi, will you make my clothes? Because they're like, I don't have time for you. You're too small. You're too green. Don't want to deal with it. And you're like, so because of the pandemic, I wanted to find a factory in the US because I wanted to be able to visit. I knew I could drive, even if it was in like North Carolina or something. I was like, let's just make it happen. But because of the technicality of our clothes, no one could make them in the United States. It was impossible. There wasn't the skill level needed. The machines, nobody had buttonholers. I didn't understand. How do you not have the machine to make buttonholes? And they're like, we just don't have one. We've never needed one. I'm like, oh my God. Or a bar tacking machine. Or if they could do all the things, the prices they were charging were astronomical. No one wants to pay $400 for a pair of hiking pants. No one. So couldn't do that either. I was like, oh God. It's all a networking game, which fortunately that is one of my strong suits. I'm very good at networking. So I found somebody who knew somebody who talked to someone else who knew someone else. And it was literally seven people before I found a factory. And I was like, okay, we found a factory. They were willing to work with us. And that's how we started. And we started small with them until we outgrew them. By then I'd made more connections and found another factory. We moved to that factory. And so we're growing with them now too. And it really is a networking game.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finding the right partner and then just investing everything you have into that relationship to make sure that it lasts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good for you. That's an apparel making boot camp, pattern making. Like you're taking DIY to the new level, and it's awesome. It's great, like getting your hands dirty, because quite frankly, there's a lot of founders who are like, I've got this great idea for thing, and then everything, and I'm speaking from experience here, then you just outsource everything, and very few of it is, I don't actually know how to construct this thing that I've trying to sell, which is, it's invaluable to be able to have kind of the intimate street level knowledge of your product. So you've got the factory, you've got the product, here it goes. How do you launch it into the world? How do you launch Alpine Parrot and its first product line into the world? And what worked from that brand building and marketing perspective in the early days?
So I knew I wanted to do a Kickstarter. That was how I was going to make it happen. If it wasn't for Kickstarter, I am not a marketing person. I'm an engineer. I like building products. So I was like, I need a platform on which I can get people to acknowledge our existence and support us as we grow. And so I spent a lot of time and money building a Kickstarter campaign. And we could talk about Kickstarter campaigns for absolutely forever. But the very, very short version of Kickstarter campaigns is none of it happens overnight. It takes 6 months to set up your Kickstarter campaign. And then also it's all a psychological game. A lot of people think, oh, if I put it out there, people will start supporting it. And so no, you spend your 6 months not only putting together all your content, but you build your lists, you get people excited about it. You have your early adopters, and then you spend a ton of money on ads. And at the end of the day, if you can break even, you have succeeded. Everyone thinks, oh, I made so much money off of Kickstarter. No, Kickstarter is not your launching point for your company. It is a marketing campaign. And as long as you think about it that way, you will not feel bad when you end up losing a little bit of money on it because you don't actually make as much money as you want. And I say that even for people who make 200,000, 500,000, like $1 million campaigns are still really expensive. Yeah. Anyway, I can talk about that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a conversation that comes up a lot, right? Because people are like, oh, I'm just going to kickstart it. And you just think if you build it, they will come, and you end up just shouting into the void. So did you work with anybody like LaunchBoom or anybody like that to bring Kickstarter into the world?
Yeah, I didn't use LaunchBoom. I did use GelOp for ads, which I have opinions about, and then I just used my network and really tried to get as many people to know about it. Cause it's like a 28 to 30 day campaign. And really all of your sales are either in the first 2 days or in your last 2 days. And everything in between is just like everything before you start is trying to get those first 2 days of sales. And then everything between those first 2 days and the last 2 days is trying to get everything set up for your last 2 days of sales. And it's a lot of work and it's really stressful. I'm glad we did it. And I think if I were to do it again, I'd probably do it a little bit differently, but I'm not mad about how it went. Our goal was $10,000. We raised 60. In the end, we probably got about 55 because there's always somebody who people who are like, oh, just kidding. I didn't actually want it. Or they put in an invalid credit card or whatever. And yeah. What you see, the numbers, that's not real. That's not real.
It's a huge run up for those first 48 hours. Like the first 24, 48 hours of that campaign is where is all that matters in a lot of ways. So it's making that big splash is super important.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you've kickstarted it. It's out in the world. Alpine Parrot is there. I'm sure there was manufacturing dramas to get your first batch into the world. We've had conversations with other entrepreneurs on this podcast about those things, and those things are real. Don't underestimate how poorly or scary your first batch is going to be. So it can happen. So just fast forwarding a little bit into the brand's out there, and now you're selling direct to consumer and kind of wholesale to outdoor retailers. What came first, and how do you think about the relationship or growing the business between those two channels? But that's always a really important conversation for people to have in the early days.
I always wanted to have a wholesale relationship. And that was really important to me because I think that in an ideal world, again, like when we talk about equity, it's really important for everybody to be able to walk into a retail store and find the thing that they want that day and to be able to walk out having purchased the thing that they need. I think one aspect of smaller bodied privilege that people never think about is how, if you're in a bigger body, you can't go to a regular store to try things on and test it out. You have to go online. And if you don't have a lot of money, which people in bigger bodies tend to make less money than people in smaller bodies, this is just a fact. It's really expensive to go online and say, all right, I'm going to buy 3 pairs of whatever in different sizes to figure out which one is the right size for me. Because I can't always trust size charts. I can't trust that a size 18 in one brand is the same as a size 18 in another brand. It's just, you never know. It's a crapshoot. And so now you have to put in your stuff and you have to wait for it to show up. And then you have to try it on and figure out what fits. And if it doesn't fit, to send it back. And then you have to figure out, okay, maybe you couldn't afford all 3, so you only bought one, and then you send it back, and now you have to wait for the next one. And whereas a lot of people get to go to a store and be like, oh, shoot, I'm going hiking this weekend. Let me go buy a pair of pants real quick. If you're in a bigger body, you have to plan that out 6 weeks in advance. And it's just, oh my God. And I didn't want that. I wanted to stop that. I wanted to stop that cycle. And so I was like, we are going to be in wholesale. This is really important to me. D2C has always been a huge part of our business just because personal relationships really lead everything. And as I was building the brand and building our first product, I had a ton of fit testers and just everyday people who were trying on our stuff and giving us feedback. And they were our very first customers because they all got discounts as I couldn't pay them. So it was like, hey, I'll give you a really nice discount on the first batch of clothes. And then, of course, our Kickstarter was all individuals. So those are also D2C customers. But once we finished our Kickstarter and started getting some press, I started getting some interest from retailers. And that was really great. They reached out to me and they were like, hey, we're really tired and sad that people come into our shop and then they leave empty-handed because they couldn't find anything. And we want to change that narrative. And I was like, great, partners immediately. And so that really kicked off our wholesale program. Was just, they came to us and we went to different trade shows and just started getting people excited about it. And it worked really well. People were really excited about what we had to offer. And that's how we got into our first retail stores. And then the goal, the pinnacle for us at least, was always REI. How do we get into REI? And I was very, very fortunate that not 2-3 months after we finally started consistently selling on our website, right? Because of supply chain issues, we had some stock and then we'd sell out and we'd have more stock and we'd sell out. And then finally we had enough stock that we weren't totally selling out immediately. REI announced their first accelerator and I applied and got into that. And that also, so that not only got us into REI, but it also enabled REI to become one of our investors. And so it's a nice symbiotic relationship there. And now we're in REI, which is really great. And check, made it. We're not in all stores. There's still a lot of hurdles around that because retail, every cubic foot matters, has to make money. And so we're still hitting those same cultural issues, and not just REI. This is across the board. A lot of retailers are like, oh, I don't know. Should we carry this product in store? How much of it should we carry? We only get a couple of people in bigger bodies coming through. We don't want to turn them away, but we also don't want to use up that space that could be for like water bottles, which have a higher sell-through rate, or I don't know, I'm making that up, but yeah.
Sure. It's challenging.
It's tricky.
It's challenging. Those, like you said, those partnerships are super important. Get on you that they came to you, like you pulled them in as opposed to pushing them. So that's always a bonus. So good for you on that. As we know, and we talked before outside of this conversation, sometimes being an entrepreneur can be lonely. You're like, sometimes I call it like stuck in the echo chamber or riding the roller coaster by yourself. What do you do to combat that and find those peers in the industry or other entrepreneurs to help you along the way? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I don't know that I would have lasted as long as I have, which didn't have comrades in arms. I was very fortunate when I first started. Before I even started the company, I'd started the company, but I hadn't left my day job yet. And I was in Tahoe, Lake Tahoe, where I go skiing and stuff. And there's another women-owned business in the area, and they have a shop, or they had a shop in Truckee. And I walked in, and they're a business called Coalition Snow. They're a women-owned ski and snowboard brand. And I was just like, hi, I'd love to talk to your CEO. And they're like, okay, here's her number, which, pro tip, don't do that. You shouldn't do that. Never, ever do that. I don't think that person lasted very much longer at the company because you're not supposed to do that. Fortunately, I took advantage and got at least her email address, and I emailed her and I was like, hi, I don't know anything about this industry. You've obviously been around for a while. I really respect what you're doing. Can we have a phone call? I'm trying to get in. And she was like, yeah, okay, fine. Sure, let's talk. And I was about to go to my first outdoor retailer. And I was like, what do I do? How do I? And she was, okay, here are the places to go. Here are the people to hang out with. These are the areas, this and this. I will be at this event. If you come, we can hang. And I was like, oh my God, amazing. I promise I won't bother you. I'll just run in, give you a high five, and run away. And I did that. I did exactly that. And she was like, oh my God, you were serious. And I was like, yeah, I don't mess around. Like when I say I'll do something, I do it. And she was like, oh, interesting. And then later that season, she had events at her shop, and I showed up and I'd be like, hey, here's my latest prototype. Here's what I'm working on, this and this and this. And she was like, you are actually doing this. I'm sure you've experienced this, Christian. People will be like, oh, you own an outdoor company. I want to start an outdoor company. Can I talk to you for 30 minutes? And you're like, cool, yeah, sure. And then you never hear from them again because they had this idea, but then they realize how hard it is. And they're like, forget it. I'm not going to actually do it. And you're like, okay, if you're not that serious, don't waste my time. And I think she saw that I was serious. And so when I left my day job, I just kept talking to her, and she helped me out with early marketing things. And then she one day was like, hey, Title IX has this pitch fest. She was like, fill out an application, make sure you get it done before the deadline. Like, it wasn't even, hey, do you want to? She was like, no, you have to do this. And I was like, okay, I don't even have a product yet. Like, it's not real yet. I'm still working on it. She's like, I don't care. You have to apply. And I was like, okay, applied, got in. That's where I met Mallory. And that was like an incredible launching point. That CEO of Coalition Snow, Jen Gurecki, is now literally one of my best friends. And it was all because I took the time to bring her into my world, or put myself into her world, and all of that. And then having that exposure to the Title IX group, that was a bunch of other women in outdoor industry as entrepreneurs. Some of them are some of my greatest, dearest friends. Then going through the accelerator at REI, have a bunch of friends who also identify as people of color. And it's just, you build that network, you start to find your people. And if you find good people, you bring them into your circle, they bring you into theirs. And it just, you start to have these spaces where you're like, okay, I have a weekly office hours, virtual office hours that it's not office hours, it's co-working. We have a virtual co-working session where a few of us will get on Zoom and we'll say, what are we working on for the next 30 minutes? We do it. We come back at the end of the 30 minutes and we're like, okay, how did it go? What are you going to work on for your next 30 minutes? And it's like literally just a working session for 2 hours, but you get so much done. And at the same time, it's okay. This is great. And then of course there's that in between time where you're just like, oh my God, I can't. Can you believe this thing that this customer said? Or, oh my goodness, I need help with this contract. How do you do this thing in Canva? And you just, it becomes your team and your crew. But I think the thing that is important to put out there is you have to put yourself out there. You have to push in order to receive. You can't just sit there waiting, because I know too many entrepreneurs who will just be like, no one is my friend. I don't know what to do. And you're like, did you talk to anybody? Have you asked? And they're like, no. You're like, well, yeah. It is a very lonely place.
But it doesn't have to be.
It
It
doesn't
doesn't
have
have
to
to
be.
be. And I
Yeah.
guess you've proven that point very well, is that
Mhm.
it feels that way. And it certainly has the opportunity to be that way. And a lot of us choose for it to be that way, but it doesn't have to be.
Yes.
And that's
Mhm.
my desire for other entrepreneurs and for myself.
Yeah.
I've worked hard to create that own network effect for myself too, because you need a support group. There's no way you're going to do it without it. And so good for
Yes.
you for doing that. And for those listening,
Yeah.
don't doubt the power of having a team of loyal friends and mentors around you to help you grow it too.
Yes.
You need it, and it pays in
Yeah.
dividends, especially, if you can add value to other people's lives, that
Yeah.
you also have a lot of information and value to bring to other people. It's not just take,
Yeah.
which is fun too. You're like, oh, I figured that out already. I can tell you, I got something for you, which is a fun feeling too.
Yeah.
So just winding down the conversation, there's a few questions I like to ask at the end to get your perspective on rapid fire style. So
Mhm.
if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? And I know that
Oh gosh.
sometimes that list is long.
Yeah.
I shouldn't put words in your mouth. For me, that list is long.
For me, if I were to do it differently, I'd probably, if I could have all the knowledge I have right now, because that's the other thing, like you make the best decisions that you can at the time that you've made them. So you can't look back and be like, oh, I was such an idiot. No, you were who you were.
Yeah. The point of this is for growth, because there are people listening to this who are a month, a year, 2 years, and 3 years behind you. So this is for them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say grow slower. And the reason for that is I came from this tech world, right? Where you grow as fast as you can. Profitability doesn't matter. Just scale. And that has made it really difficult to maintain a good cash flow. There were things that I never knew, I didn't expect. And so I think that if I were to have slowed it down a lot more at the beginning, I could have hit profitability a lot sooner and then grown more sustainably. At the moment, we are heavy air quotes profitable, like heavy air quotes, but that's because we have cut other things, pretty essential things, in order to make that possible. So we've sacrificed the future in the name of attempting to grow effectively. And so I think if I were to do it over again, I would have done it much more slowly. And also don't project a 10x or 40x return in 5 years. That's stupid. Don't do that. You can do that in software. You can't do that in apparel or in like physical product goods. You got to acknowledge that like winning is like a 6x return, not a 10x return, or even like a 3x return is a good return.
Winning is, anyway. I like to say winning is just surviving.
Yes.
You're winning if you're surviving.
Exactly.
Is there a question that you wish people would ask you in these types of conversations that I haven't asked you?
I do think that, especially if we're talking entrepreneurship, like it's so easy for people to be like, oh, how did you start? Why do you care? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah. Can we talk about business? Because business is really hard. And let's talk about cash flow. Let's talk about how just totally uncool it is to not have more frank conversations around debt capital versus investment capital and how we can effectively get that capital when we don't own our own homes or don't have rich relatives. Like all of that is really hard, but no one talks about it. And I think that could be a really valuable conversation, especially when our culture says, oh, if you start your own company, that's how you're going to make it big. Look at the Zuckerbergs and Gates and Jobses. And you're like, yeah, but I'm not them. I didn't grow up like them. I don't have the access that they have. And so I'm trying to change the world, but I don't have those same foundational opportunities. So how do I do that? And I think that there's more people like me than like them.
Yeah, for sure. There's more people like us than there are for them, for sure. So that's good. I appreciate that because I'm going to take that and let's integrate that into our next conversation because we'll have a second conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's good. Like we can get into the weeds on that because you're 100% correct. There's a lot of glitz and glamour or just we learn about the successes, much like venture capital, right? Like their goal is to out of every 10 investments, only one of them needs to strike gold and the rest can just fail. We never get to hear about those 9. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned in the 9. And sometimes
Definitely,
if the 9 didn't try to swing for a home run and just got happy hitting singles and doubles, they'd still be around, right?
Yeah.
Back to your grow slow analogy. It's funny because one of my first outdoor retailers, there's a brand that I love called Ugg Monk. And back in the day, he sold t-shirts and he had this wonderful t-shirt that said slow and steady wins. And I'd wear that day one of like trade shows that I go to as a reminder that I'm just here for the long haul. You know what I mean? We just got to grow slow and there's nothing wrong with that. So slow and steady wins is a beautiful one. Okay. So my last question for you is how do you define success for yourself?
Yeah, it's not going to be, I exited with a 40x return. I can tell you that. But no, actually, at the very beginning, I'm really bad at putting together business plans, really bad at it. I know some people have put together like these 20-page, 30-page business plans. So this is how this is going. Someone told me I had to put together a business plan and I found this 1-pager business plan template. And I was like, I'm going to do that. And it was basically like, okay, what are your goals over the next 1, 5, 10 years? And I wrote things like, I want to get into REI. I want to know that I've made a difference. I want to know that I'm going to produce things and have my name on them and feel really good. And I have checked off every single one of those things.
Yeah. Way to go.
Literally, like in the first couple of years of the company, like literally seeing people. I love doing these fit events, fit testing events or fit finding events where we just have our stuff, we'll have pop-ups, whatever, and people will come in and they'll put on our clothes and you can see the tears in their eyes because they finally have clothes that fit them and they feel like they belong. And I'm like, if that's not success, I don't know what is because we've done it. We've changed people's lives with our products. And I will often tell people like ostensibly we're an outdoor apparel company, but we're actually an opportunities for joy company. We're here to enable people to live their best lives, going outside and doing the things they love, spending time in nature, right? Safely and comfortably. That's all we want to do. That's all I want to do is I just want to go outside and have fun, whether it's sitting on a roof or by a campfire with my friends after a nice long hike. That's what we want. And so I am already successful. I did it. Did it.
Good for you. I don't think there's a better place to end our conversation than with that. So thank you very much, Raquel.
Thank you, Christian. This is so fun.
You brought a lot of wisdom to it and I really appreciate it. And congratulations on your success. It's
Thank
very
you.
fun to watch.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you know someone who would enjoy this episode, please share it with them. If you enjoyed it, take 30 seconds to give us a review on your podcast player. Ratings and reviews go a long way in spreading the word about the show. It takes hours to create an episode and only 30 seconds to leave a review. We'd really appreciate it. To learn more about CORE, visit coreoutdoors.org. That's KORE outdoors.org. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.